you know, you can do a lot of things in Jenkins. You can do a lot of things with Qt. You can do a lot of things with deployment. There's a lot of different installer frameworks, but I made here basically the simplest uh, possible like bare essence of a command build that I would write on Windows for a Qt application. So all this is here's a comment. It says that if you run this script over and over, it's going to edit your path every time it's called. And if your Windows path gets too long, you'll run into a error in the terminal. This only happens in the interactive terminal if you're running this manually. Um, I like to make builds that you can run manually or you can run in Jenkins because I feel like Jenkins makes a lot of things like perfectly reproducible, and it also makes them really, really shareable. But also it adds a bit of overhead. So if you're in a heavy prototyping phase where you're going to change a lot of things perhaps, and then your deployment pipeline has to keep being updated because the structure of your application changes in really deep ways very rapidly, like an R&D type project, and it's perfectly okay to just have some .bat file that your developer runs. No non-developers have to use it. So this is if you're running in the terminal. This just warns you if you see an error message about your path being too long, what to do. Just restart your command prompt. Okay, so you can see here you require Visual Studio to compile Qt on Windows, and I only make 64-bit builds these days anymore. So this just sets up some environment variables and stuff. Again, this does the same thing, but these are Qt specific environment variables. You start the build. Okay, so I basically wrote this little Python script. I go through all of my Qt, um, all the files, basically in the build folder, and wherever this variable is, I just called it var to be really generic for the sake of example. I'll replace it with a path to my third-party libs. And the reason I do that is because this script needs to be generic. The the developer is using Qt Creator on their machine, so they can set this environment variable to some path on their machine, and I can set it to whatever path I need, and every developer can set these. So we would use these variables in our .pro files to set these paths to our dependency folders, and I'm basically hard coding the correct path into all of the code, all of the source files before building. And you can do this using an environment variable, or you can do it this way by just doing text replacement. In this particular case, with the .bat or with the batch scripting, it was easier to do it this way. But you can see on the Mac, it's easier to do it the other way. Anyway, so moving on. So then we call qmake. You'll have some other variables if you need. You can set them. You can pass in, command line stuff, whatever you need. At this phase, you go ahead and cd into your build folder. You run qmake. This is like kind of a recursive call, so if you have subdir projects or whatever, this will compile all of them and make your make files and stuff. This stuff, these are again just command line arguments. If you're integrating CrashPad into your build, you would use this. This is for building in release mode with debug info, which is useful for tracing crashes and things like that. Yes, and then this is the actual compiler. So this does the actual build. You'll put this J6. If you had 6 cores, you would put J6. If you had 8 cores, you could put J8. This just makes it compile faster. If your build is being wonky, I would recommend taking this out just to see if you could fix it by making things simpler. But if everything is pretty stable, you can add this basically this multi-core compilation flag to make it go 6 times as fast if you had 6 cores, of course. Yeah, and then I'm just saying build the release version. You would put debug here if you want to build debug, and I just put a nice message here, and then here I'm putting the variable back into the .pro files after I'm done. Right, so this text replacement will just put everything back the way I found it. And this script allows me to, do kind of a deployment thing, build on the command line. The next part of the script would be like where I copy things into folders and pass things to my installer framework, probably. It'll take your .exe and all your dependencies, and some you'll pass it to some installer framework that'll build an installer for you. Um, so yeah, I was using something like this when I was frequently switching in between the IDE and the building stuff on the command line for testing, things like that. And this is just how you would build. You could take a script like this and then you wrap Jenkins around it, right? Um, put this in your version control and so on. So this is just an example just to show the barest possible, simplest, here's how you compile on the command line for Qt and Windows.